Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining our diagnostic training session today. And what you're about to see is a pre-recorded training session we did over in the United States. But be assured that a lot of the material that we cover is really applicable to any automotive application. So just be aware that yes, it is a lot of North American vehicles, but they will apply a lot of the same principles apply over in the UK as well. Now, if you do have any questions, if you're watching this during the premiere, you can just leave it in the chat. We'll be monitoring live chat. If you're watching this after the premiere, then just feel free to leave a comment underneath the video and we'll get to those as we can as well. So my name is Jason Gabrinas. I'm one of Snap-on's diagnostic technical trainers. I've been in the training department since 2013, traveling around North America, helping techs and shop owners get the most out of their diagnostic equipment. Before I did that, it was a couple years as a diagnostic sales rep at Snap-on, so I had 30 different franchisees I worked with, as well as the shops that they serviced in order to help everyone get the most out of their diagnostic needs. Then before I did that, it was 8 years at Subaru, so I worked in a dealership, and over time, I guess, just became the default diag guy in the shops. I always ended up having the drivability problems, the intermittent problems, the weird wiring problems that would show up on those cars. And that's really where I cut my diagnostic teeth, was trying to figure out all those weird head scratcher type cars that would come into my bed. Then before that, bunch of other miscellaneous wrenching jobs. Been a little over 25 years under hood experience for me. So our topic today is OEM specific training for BMW. We're keeping on with this series we started this year. We did Ford, we did Toyota, now we're doing BMW, and more manufacturers to come as we go throughout the year. So what we like to do with this is, give you a little history, give you a little background, some popular models that show up, some popular codes and popular issues that might show up on the vehicles as well. And the main reason for that is, well, if you only work on one type of car or maybe only a few different makes, and then you get that oddball make that comes in that you're not really sure about, you're not all that familiar with, maybe you might want some tips and tricks, that occur. So when we see this problem, check this thing, right? I know we had tons of them at Subaru. When we get to Subaru, you'll be learning about quite a few of them, I'm sure. But um, every brand has those little idiosyncrasies between them. So I want to try and highlight some of those as we go through our different brands throughout the year. So as I said, tonight is BMW. So a little bit of a history on BMW is it was founded in 1910 by Gustav Otto Manufacturing Aircraft Engines. They first started with that. And then 13 years later, they produced their first motorcycle, which they do, of course, still produce them to this day. And 5 years after that, became an automobile manufacturer. So they were making motorcycles before they became an automotive manufacturer. Now, of course, there was some unpleasantness, I guess you could say, between the late 30s and mid 40s. So after World War II, they were banned from manufacturing automobiles and aircraft, with, I guess, for good reason, after World War II. So in order to keep afloat and survive, they weren't allowed to make cars, they weren't allowed to make motorcycles, but they were able to make pots, pans, and bicycles. So they made pots, pans, and bicycles, and that's how they kept afloat after the war. Wasn't too long after that, though, only 3 years after the war was over, that they started motorcycle manufacturing again in 48. And then 4 years after that, they restarted automobile manufacturing in 1952. And then, they still manufacture motorcycles and automobiles to this day. Now let's talk about some of the models that we would be familiar with now. We're not going to talk about like the 2002 or anything like that from a ways ago. We'll talk about the ones that we can currently see, and if you wanted to go to the dealership, you could buy. So things like the 5 Series was actually introduced in 1972, the 3 Series 1975, 6 Series 1976, and the 7 Series introduced in 1978. Of course, there was the X Series that are in there. Those are fairly newer. And then the 3 Series split off to the 3 and the 4 Series, maybe mid-late 90s, early 2000s. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was 20-something years ago they split off there. Also, they own Mini, so Mini Coopers, and Rolls-Royce. So you get your itty-bitty Mini up to like a really fancy Rolls-Royce, and anything in between, that's your BMW. Owns all of that. So some interesting little history there. Some top models. This is based on North American sales because that's what we have the data for. So this is the last 10 years. Now, out of the three we've done so far, out of the three brands we've done, this is the top European manufacturer. But as far as sales numbers, we're not nearly anywhere near where we were with the last two with Toyota and Ford. The number one selling model was the X5, almost 600,000 over 10 years. So that's what, less than 60,000 a year. All the way down to the 2 Series down there, 94,000, and even the 7 Series has been around since the 70s, 95,000. So that's less than 10,000 a year for those on average, right? So picked out some representative models, kind of where about they were in their peak over the last 10 years. 2017 X5 was one of them. That was near one of the peaks there. The 2017 X5 was the third generation. It has a 2-liter and 3-liter gas, a 3-liter diesel, and 4.4-liter engines. There's also a 2-liter turbo plug-in hybrid powertrain that was also available for this, and that was fairly new in 2017. 8-speed automatic transmissions, what that came with, no manual option to speak of, and of course, the hybrid would have a hybrid type powertrain. Not so much as a transmission. 2015 3 Series was another kind of peak year for that. 6th generation 3 Series. 2-liter gas, 2-liter diesel, and 3-liter gas engine. So the 2-liter and 3-liter gas engines would be pretty much the same ones you'd find in the X5. There's really not a lot of variables in between them. 8-speed automatic transmission and a 6-speed manual was offered there as well. That's getting rarer and rarer, as I'm sure you know out there. Actually read an article the other day that said, here's the list of vehicles you can still get with a stick shift. And it was a decent list still. Probably a couple dozen vehicles that can still be had with it, but way less than it ever used to be for sure. So that's, good to have. And then 2016 7 Series. So I picked this particular year because it was the highest North America and Europe sales volume of that year. It was 6th generation of the 7 Series. Got a 3-liter, 4.4, and a 6-liter engine available. 8-speed automatic transmission. And as I said, the highest North America and European sales volume that year for the 10 years covered, of course. And to say it was the highest, it's still only not even 13,000. It was 12,000 and change in each market. And they weren't that far off, a couple hundred either way between North America and Europe. So probably a lot of factors involved in that. I would imagine the first one's probably the price because that's one of the top tier series for BMW. So I would imagine that's where all the fancy stuff comes in. You've seen the pictures of the new ones with the giant screen that goes across the whole back. Yeah, it's a 7 Series. So all the high tech stuff, that's where it goes first, and usually it trickles down. So yeah, that's their top of the range, and that would be why I would imagine 13,000 a year at the peak. So let's look at some common issues that we've run into here, looking at the information available. So many occurrences of misfires. Seems to be a lot of them on, say, like the 3-liter, the N52s and such. They actually had a TSB back in the day that said, hey, if you find Bosch coils in these cars, you need to replace them with Delphi coils because we got a problem with the Bosch coils. So a lot of coil issues, misfire issues strewn about. EVAP issues we're going to see on pretty much any of them, and I think that's really across the board. Doesn't matter what the manufacturer is. A lot of EVAP issues just in general, just because there's a lot of moving parts, so to say. Intake system issues from the intake manifold all the way down through the valves, and we'll see why when we talk about some of these specifics that are specific to them. And a lot of thermostat and cooling system issues too. So they got electric thermostat in there, heated thermostat. They call it map cooling. Talked about it before in one of these classes. But yeah, appears they set a fair number of codes on that. So that's what you're going to run into. So some common codes. This was based off of the top 3,000 some odd codes that we get on the scan tools that people have asked for more information on. And usually I try to get the top 10 out of any manufacturer. The BMW actually really only had 9 across the board, but close enough. And we can see, like I said, throttle, boost pressure, throttle, charge air pressure control, variable cam timing, throttle valve, mixture control, intake, variable cam control, variable camshaft timing control. So a lot of those intake type codes. And another thing that you'll notice too is that often the BMW will present to the scan tool in a hexadecimal code format. Because they use hexadecimal, they use decimal, and they also have there's conversions for P codes, B codes, C codes that we'd be used to. But it actually presents it, factory tool would actually present it through the Snap-on tool as that hexadecimal as well. Most times, sometimes you'll get into P codes, but more than likely it's going to be that hex code. So just be aware that that's another little oddball, unique thing with BMW. Some OEM specific features, and this is where I said we're going to come into some technology stuff, right? So valve train control, a lot of valve train control. So this is Vanos, and what that does is that is your timing advance, right? Oil controlled and all that. They do it pretty similar to how other manufacturers do it. So this isn't exactly the most exclusive one, but how they do it is kind of proprietary to them. It's not that different, like I said, but there are some interesting things that can be done with it. Like there's a timing chain test in there. You can see how stretched your timing chain is, which is kind of nice. You can see that through the scan tool. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But that is one of the things that we're going to talk about is the Vanos. You may see the word, up on the scan tool every once in a while. Valvetronic, this is another thing. So this is the first one was timing, cam timing, valve timing. In this case, this is valve lift and duration as to how far it can lift it. So it's got these stepper motors in there and it's a little eccentric that will push on the rocker in a different way depending on where it's at. So here is like here's one way fully retracted and here's the other way fully out. And what it does is it'll press on the valve more or less depending on where it's at. We got a little animation here that shows you can see the little eccentric there on that side. So that's one way, it's slightly opening. And then if they turn again, it won't open at all. And then if we turn kind of in the middle, it slightly opens. And then all the way the other way, they open very large. So depending on where that is, you see we got the springs and we got the rockers and so on in there. Depending on how that's set up, there's electronics in the solenoid, moves it around in a worm gear or whatever. And that's how that works. The cam doesn't change profile. It's the lifters and the rollers, the rockers that ride on the camshaft, and then depending on where it's at, will give us that different profile of lifting those valves. That's certainly unique to BMW. I don't know anybody else who does it that way. And then they also have two different types of variable runner intakes. So we have the older version and then a newer version. So the older version was DISA. You may have heard of that before because they had a fair number of problems with those as well. It's a multiple runner intake. There's your throttle. And then inside the intake, we have these two valves right there, right? So under low RPM situation, it's going to give me the longer runners so I can get better torque. And then at a mid-range, it kind of opens up this middle here so we can have flow kind of go through and do some more scavenging there. And then at high RPMs, we go max out, and then we can actually scavenge more from other cylinders as well. Gives us short runners. It allows it to work properly at a higher RPM. So it'll change varying torque depending on the load. So that's DISA. And then now we also have DIVA, which DIVA is a infinitely variable. So it has you can see it kind of looks like a shell maybe on the outside. It's kind of a curvy thing. And then there's another curvy wheel that goes on the inside that can change and rotates around this center, and it opens and closes that intake based on what the driving parameters of the engine are at that time. But it is infinitely variable. It's not like the DISA where it's kind of open or closed. In this one, it can be any sort of length that they want, within the parameters of how long it is. But it can go from quite short to very long, depending on where they have that kind of in phase with each other. And there can be some failures on that, and there's some scan tool functions. Another thing to be aware of, which you may or may not be aware of, but round about OBD2 time over here, 1996, the Europeans didn't have it really specified out back then. Took them until the early 2000s to get everything kind of worked out. So you will find between 96 and '03 or so uh, BMWs with two connectors. You know, the 16-pin connector under the dash if it's a US spec vehicle, but also under the hood, you will have their factory 20-pin connector as well. And depending on what system you need to get into, it may ask for this other connector. So just be aware if you have an older BMW 96 to '03 ish, it may have both connectors. One's under the hood, one's under the. All right, now on to our tips from a tech segment. So this is I talk to one or multiple techs who have or currently work on these vehicles, and they just have those little nuggets or after working on them for so long. Oh yeah, when this happens, check this type of thing, right? Those are the kind of things that we would look for when we're not familiar with a brand, right? And we get a weird problem. So misfire diagnosis. Remember how I mentioned earlier that yeah, misfires are fairly common, and they also had a bulletin on a couple of them where it was okay if you see these Bosch coils here, just replace them with the Delphi coils because that's just going to be the problem. But another thing that happens is due to the DME, which is that's their acronym for ECU. Due to the logic in that, if a misfire is detected, it will shut down the entire cylinder. So the injector and the coil, it'll just shut off and just not control them at all, which can, as you may imagine, create a challenge when trying to diagnose a misfire the traditional way. If I'm trying to test the injector and the injector is not being turned on by the computer, oh, well, the injector's not working. Is it a problem with the injector? Is it a problem with the computer? Well, no, actually, it's working by design as designed. So you may have to check it some other way, maybe with resistance or something of that nature. So it does create a challenge when that happens. Some manufacturers do, some manufacturers don't. So it's just in this case, that is something that they do with their logic. How about measuring oil in there? Because a lot of them don't have dipsticks anymore. Mercedes is a culprit of this too. But they decided, well, customers don't need to check their oil, apparently, I guess. I don't know who made that decision, but oil level measurement is measured by a PID. So you'd have to go into data stream and look at a PID. Now, I'm sure there's probably a display somewhere on one of the screens on the car too. But in order to actually see how much oil is actually in the car, in this case, I see 22.27 millimeters. Is that okay? I don't know. What's the spec? I don't know what the spec is on how many millimeters of oil are supposed to be in the pan. So that's just yet another over engineering problem challenge that you may run into there. So, hey, where's the dipstick? Oh, it doesn't have one. You got to check the PID. Another issue that we can have is many of these now have electric water pumps on them, which can cause some of their own issues in their own right. But you see it's held in with these aluminum bolts. Aluminum bolts right there inside maybe a steel piece there. But what happens is also the ground for this is also on an aluminum. And those aluminum bolts, just kind of as a feature, they tend to back out sometimes. So I could have a problem with my electric water pump, and if I don't double check this ground to make sure this ground is good at all times and nice and tight and torqued down the way it's supposed to be, it may be loose or it may intermittently be loose, and I could replace this water pump not knowing that, hey, that ground is actually the problem. So that's another something to look for. Now let's get to OEM specific scan tool function. So engine related tests. Remember how I said we got this complex engineering in this engine, so there's a lot of different tests that are specific to it. So cooling system ventilation, that's with the electric water pump, so that'll help bleed the system. Injector coding, especially on the direct injection motors, you have to type in a code for each new injector when it gets replaced. Starter exchange, when you change the starter, there's actually a couple things you need to do. You need to be able to unlock the starter as well. So starter interlock for it, which we're going to talk in a little bit. But starter exchange, you can go in there and it'll reset the number of engine starts that are available on the starter. You can start up the Valvetronic system. If you do work on the Valvetronic system, it'll go over, it'll do some configuring and start itself up. Valvetronic limit learn, so it'll know the limits of which way that eccentric shaft can go if you do any work once again. Vano solenoid valve tests. You need to be able to check the solenoids on those, and there's some tests for that. Like I said, there's also a timing chain stretch test on a couple of them. So a lot of things need to be done using a scan tool. As far as transmission related goes, oil level adjustment, if I need to do any sort of repairs to the unit, whether or not the electronics or the gears or what have you, you have to go in here and actually do this test in order to adjust the oil level. Other tests, for example, that reset starter interlock I just mentioned, where if I do any work, if the vehicle is not starting, if I replace a module, or if one of the modules has been removed, or if the vehicle's battery has become discharged or dead, you need to do that reset starter interlock to allow it to start again. So you may run into a no start issue that's not actually anything to do with the engine or anything like that, or the battery even. It's actually we need to do this procedure. Also, initialize new headlight driver module and teach in turn indicator. So if I change headlights or if I change signal marker bulbs, I need to relearn those into the vehicle as well. So there's a function for that. Also in this car, it's not necessarily specific to BMW, but they do have an active sound design module where it has microphones and speakers throughout the cabin, and it plays anti-sound, I guess for lack of a better word, out of phase sound, to quiet down the sound in the cabin. So that is a thing that is available as well. All right, let's do our live little walkthrough on the tool, see what we can find with this. I'll start on the X5. Right, and see what we can see. So let's go into the engine. And we'll go to functional tests and special functions. We can see quite a few special functions. Didn't even mention the battery. That's not exclusive to BMW. It's fairly common across European makes, but when you replace the battery, you do need to do a reset relearn. Clear adaptations, cooling system ventilation, that's that coolant bleed. Tank leakage diagnosis for evap, so that actually pulls on the vacuum pump and allows us to test that way. Let's see, idle speed adjustment, injector coding there once again if I replace the injectors. Starter exchange, that's where it resets the starter counts. Startup Valvetronic limit learn. Vano solenoid valves for the intake and that'll actually open and close them as well. Let's go to transmission. And when I go in here, we can see under the functional test, special functions as an oil balancing. So the oil level in the automatic gearbox can only be adjusted when following conditions are met. It needs to be under this. And then why does the oil level need to be adjusted? Either the fault stored in the transmission for an oil level check, or the mechatronics or converters have been replaced, or parts have been replaced, not the mechatronics or the converter. You can just go in there, raise the vehicle on a hoist, such as the wheels turn freely and apply the parking brake. With the oil filler plug according to the instructions, with the engine turned off, fill the gearbox up to the lower edge of the filler plug, start the engine, immediately fill the transmission with oil again until it overflows. Sounds nice and messy. And then it'll go through that, and it goes through the I guess it must kind of burp it, I guess, and allows it to do that. And depending on what kind of work you've done on the transmission, it'll do it differently between those. All right, and then what was the other? There's that active sound design again. Body domain controller. So there's a functional test under special functions in there to reset the starter interlock like I talked about before. So only carry out this function if the CAS, FEM, or BDC has been replaced or if the vehicle is not starting. Also, this procedure may need to be executed if any of these have been removed or the vehicle's battery has become discharged. Do you want to carry out the procedure? Sure. And then it's going to go through and it's going to walk you through how to do it. It may or may not error out on me here. Let's see. There we go. Reset successfully. Switch off the ignition. And we're back. There's another one where we can force sleep mode on the body control module as well. If I'm trying to diagnose like a draw or something like that, I can put it to sleep, put the modules to sleep, so I don't have to worry about having them awake for hours. All right, let's go look in some real world information. All right. So based on, like I said, they weren't huge sellers in this 1 year. 39,242 repairs for the 2017 X5 with a 3 liter, 35i. So we see pads and rotors. That's pretty common, right? Spark plugs is fairly high. Like I said, a lot of misfires. EVAP, coolant thermostat. What's this one? That is EVAP, I believe. Let's see. Yep, EVAP. So 190302 becomes a very small leak. P0442 would be a P code for that. What's this next? Sometimes they don't show up either if you click on just because of that conversion. Thermostat, oxygen sensor, evap system, oil leaks, #1 right there, fluid leaks. Engine does not start. That could be that starter interlock thing when the battery runs down. Could allow that. Burning smell, engine runs rough, and then the top 10's right there. So air suspension, air spring, that's number 10 on the list. So maybe they got air suspension problems too. All right, that's that one. Let's go into my 3 series, which you're going to notice when we go into the scanner. It's going to have very similar functions. I think it has fewer functions, but very similar still. Go in there, and there's the injector coding. Oh, there's the timing chain test. It'll actually walk you through 60 seconds as a delay. It's got to warm up the cat. It goes through the test. If you watched last week's class, actually walked through it as well. But it'll tell you how much it's stretched, whether or not you got, how many degrees it's off or what have you. So that's good to know if I need, well, do I need to replace the timing chain? Is the timing chain stretched? So it can actually go in there and it will give you a result at the end. Vano solenoids, Valvetronic again, starter exchange again. So all those things that were in there before. Let me look in the transmission real quick. Yeah, so that's going to have the same functional oil balancing. Actually, if I change transmissions, we go with this one. That's got a fluid adjustment and an oil balancing. So it just kind of depends on the transmission you got in there, and the tool will know based on the vehicle. All right, let's go to SureTrack again. Take a look at this 328i. Okay. Okay, we see 48,000 repairs in this case. Pads and rotors, battery, spark plug, headlight bulbs. That's kind of high. Thermostat, cooling system. Those are kind of high, I would think, as well. There's a thermostat code. I think this first one is as well. Let's see. OEM testing. Thermostat, heater, control circuit are open, right? So it's got the map thermostat. So it's got the heated thermostat in there. So looks like there's a fair number of failures on there where I'll get a code for it. So first, top 2 codes are for the thermostat, and then 2 lean, evap, oxygen sensor down here, coolant thermostat again. So yeah, lots and lots of thermostat issues. Thermostat over here, oil leaks, engine doesn't start again, runs rough, fluid leaks. A lot of very similar things across the board there. Cooling system, like I said, coolant thermostat. A lot of those. And then finally, we'll get to our 7 series. Like I said, only sold 12,000 and change of these in US and 12,000 and change of them in Europe. Also on this particular engine, it has a master and a slave engine controller. So there's actually 2 engine computers on this vehicle. So you need to look inside. If you can't find it in one, it might be in the other. So there's the example. I got seven different functional tests in there. But if I go into my slave and see the functional tests in there, I got 2: fuel pump and adaptations. So I didn't see reset adaptations in the other one, I don't think. So that's just, like I said, you got to go through it and see what's there. Let's see. Yeah, I think that'll do. All right, now let's go into SureTrack. Oh, gotta log myself out. Logged in too many times. All right, so there we go. Like I said, 1,700 repairs logged. So not a ton, but that's just because it's not that common a car. Because remember, it was across the board on all of them. It was about 12,000. So this is 1,700 on a 750i. What if I change my vehicle? Maybe I change it to 740i. Then what do I see? The 3 liter. That's 1,026. And then if we go to 760 Li, you can see that's 4. Right? Didn't sell too many of those. I mean, obviously they sold more than 4, but it's not that common. You can tell just by going through the different engines and the different models as to what are the more common vehicles versus the least common. That's 1,121. That one. So let me go back to my other one where I started. I think that was a 750i X-Drive. There you go, 1,731. Like I said. Pads and rotors, breakware sensors, battery, AC refrigerant. That seems kind of high. AC and up, that's pretty high. Coolant leaks, coolant thermostat, cam position, evap. I think that was one of the heater codes too, right? Actually, that one didn't show up. All right, so and it's all in the onesies and twosies down here as well, right? So kind of depends on where they're going to bring it to. They're going to bring it to an aftermarket shop, or they're going to bring it to the dealer. Pay that much for the car, you might end up bringing it to the dealer too. So that's pretty much that. So that's going to cover it. Hope you picked up some tips and tricks on some of the unique, oddball things when it comes to a BMW. And with that, that is our time here today. So make sure you tune in for new diagnostic content every week. We will be premiering a new video every Wednesday at 7 p.m. UK time. So make sure you check it out on the YouTube channel. If you're watching, well, of course, you would be watching this on YouTube, but make sure you subscribe, thumbs up, ring the little notification bell so you know anytime we post new content. And it's youtube.com/SnapOnDiagnosticsUK. With that, time for questions. If you have any questions, just feel free. Once again, if you're watching this on a premiere, just leave it in the live chat and we'll answer those. Otherwise, leave a comment under the video and we will get to those as we monitor those comments as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learning a little bit more about how you might be able to be more efficient at diagnosing vehicles using some of the information that we've given you today. Hopefully, we'll see you next week. Hopefully, you can watch and see you on any of our other videos. Have a good week. Have a good night and take care.